In this lesson we're going to add a jumping feature to our game. The first thing we'll do is write some code that listens for a spacebar press. When the spacebar gets pressed, we'll write some code that responds to this by causing the player to jump. So here in my code window, in the update function, this is the code that I'm going to use to make the player jump. The first line is the line that listens for the key press. After that, I have a couple of lines that I've remarked out. I could use these lines to cause the player to jump as well. So here, player rigid, that's the rigid body component, add relative force, and I add a new vector to that. So when I run my code, it's running here. When I press the spacebar, now you can see that I've got a slight problem because my player registers each key press. Whenever the spacebar is pressed down, it registers that as a key press. And it means that I can hover and jump way too high. That's not a feature we want in our game. And so to fix that, I will change the event listener to get key down. Now also, because it's a little bit simpler and easier to understand, a little bit more intuitive, I've remarked out the line of code where I add a new vector, and instead I'm adding relative force transform.up times 50. Now 50 won't be enough of a multiple to make my player jump very nicely, so I'm going to bump that up to 500. I'll save that. I'll switch over to Unity and we'll run that. So now when I press the spacebar, that's not working. Yes, it is working. So when I press the spacebar, I need to actually press the spacebar down before my player registers the spacebar. So I can't just simply hold my spacebar down. I need to make a press. So that's a better system for listening for the spacebar press, but I still have the problem where my player can make multiple jumps. And I really want to remove this ability. I want the player to be able to jump only one single time until it returns to the ground before it can jump again. And so what I'm going to do is I'll create a Boolean variable, and I'll switch this Boolean variable once the key has been pressed to cause the player to jump, and I'll switch the Boolean back once the player collides with the ground. And so the first piece of code that I need to add is this. I create a public variable, is jumping, it's a Boolean, and I set it to be false. The next thing I need to do in my event handler for my space press, which occurs here, if get key down is a space, I'm going to add and is jumping equals false. So I've set jumping to be false, is jumping equals false. If that's correct, then we can enter this segment. And then the next thing I need to do in my code in that function is set is jumping to be true. When I test that code, I see that it works. However, the problem with it is that I can only jump one single time. We'll fix that up in our next lesson.